Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Now, Nigeria's headline inflation rate rose to 34.60% in November 2024, up from 33.88% in October, marking the third consecutive month of rising inflation, according to data released by the National Statistics Agency. Month on month, the inflation rate stood at 2.64%, underscoring ongoing price surges across goods and services. Now, after easing briefly in July and August, inflation resumed its upward trajectory in September, driven by the lingering effects of the naira devaluation and successive petrol price hikes. Now, these factors have intensified the country's worst cost of living crisis in decades, exacerbating hardships in Africa's most populous nation. In response, the Central Bank of Nigeria has implemented 6 interest rate hikes this year, totaling 875 basis points in a bid to rein in inflationary pressures. Now, to help make sense of this, we're joined by Head Corporate Finance and Advisory, Anchoria Advisory Services Limited, Damilola Titiladunayo. Hello, Damilola. Thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Hi, good afternoon.
All right, now can you speak to us? It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Damilola. So can you speak to us on the key drivers behind the persistent rise in Nigeria's inflation rate and how, the structural issues in the economy exacerbates these pressures?
Okay, so speaking to the key inflation drivers, it's good without saying. Number one key driver is the exchange rate volatility. For a country like Nigeria, a lot of pass-through, the instability in the exchange rates, has actually affected a lot of things, down to the price increase. Today, you wake up to an exchange rate of 1,600. You don't know what it's going to be tomorrow. No good currency survives in that kind of thing. And as long as you keep having that instability in your exchange rate, most of the goods are imported, driven by same exchange rate. And that continues to drive the increase in price of goods and commodities generally. So one key driver is the exchange rate volatility. Another driver is the fuel increase. So if you follow the trajectory since the subsidy removal and the consequent increase in price of fuel, prices of goods and commodities have reacted positively in that same trend, and it's actually been a direct causal relationship. So as the fuel price goes up, prices of goods and commodities go up. Nigeria is a friend calls it a generator economy. So a lot of things depend on fuel price. As long as the cost of powering your facility, your equipment increases, your output price too will also increase, and that in turn drives inflation upward.
All right, now we've also seen a lot of, CBN's interest rate hikes. How effective have these hikes been in curbing inflation? And what other monetary or fiscal measures, could implement or could complement these efforts?
Unfortunately, the kind of results that you would expect from the consistent or continuous increase in the hiking rate has not been seen, largely because most of these variables or interest rates does not work in isolation. So there's this general economic belief that so once your inflation, to tame inflation, you keep increasing interest rates. But there's a point at which it no longer achieves that same result. So for example, most of there's a problem of pass-through. I run a farm, or let me put it this way, I run a factory. So to get finance to run my business, I get rates at 30%. So that increases my cost of production. Consequently, I increase my cost of selling produce. So if you want to buy, say, cement from me tomorrow, I will factor in that high cost of raising the money into it. And that, in a way, does not tame inflation. So the required result is no longer being achieved with the continuous increase in rates, right? Because there are many variables outside of many variables that drive inflation outside of interest rate. One, if you look at the informal economy, the informal sector, and the way it has responded to also the consequent increase in interest rate. So generally, for example, if you're raising money in the capital markets today, you'll be doing, say, for a shorter instrument, you'll possibly be in the region of 29%, 30% yield, somewhere where the yield of the treasury bill instruments are. If I'm raising money at 30%, there's no way I will sell, there's no way I will crystallize or capitalize the increase in that cost on the produce. So yes, in the early days, interest rate is expected to tame inflation, but there's an extent to which it can go. And sadly, that explains the outcry in the market. People are now having to buy things at a more expensive price than they would have done that before, right? And the unfortunate reality is that the interest rate, as long as it keeps increasing, cost of produce continues to increase, and then your inflation plays along that same line.
All right. Now, Damilola, just before we let you go, can you tell us how do you think Nigeria can leverage technology, infrastructure development, or even policy reforms to boost agricultural productivity and also to achieve long-term food security?
That sounds very beautiful on paper, but in practice, the first thing you have to identify is what is the major driver of inflation. As of today, our food inflation is somewhere around 40%, right? You need to identify what the major driver of inflation is to be able to curb inflation. Picking it from where I stopped on interest rates. The major driver of inflation in today is food. The cost of food produce is increasing, possibly because my background is in agri before I ventured into finance. One major thing that is not being spoken about today is the effect of climate change. So, this year, farmers are possibly having the least cultivation. So we have a lesser land cultivation. Farmers cannot cultivate as much land as they would have cultivated in the past. Why? Because there's an increase in their cost of cultivation. So let's say for 1 hectare of land before, I need like 500,000 to cultivate. Today, I need like 15,000. So I'd rather just cut my quote according to my farmland, right? Number two is the sherry, for example, is something you expect to start seeing in December. It's not anywhere close. June, July, farmers were expecting rainfall. There was no rainfall. All these things kickstart and all these things continuously increase the price of food produce, and that consequently increases inflation. So the major solution or the major forward step in reducing inflation in Nigeria is, one, to reduce the cost of buying food.
Okay.
How do you do that? Then there has to be an active role of government, right, in the production. Agric today is input driven, so we train 50,000 farmers, we celebrate, not output. What is the average ton of yam that XYZ number of farmers that we've trained can produce over time before we even go to technology at all? We need to, as much as possible, try to see how we can maximize the potential from our agric being input driven to being output driven. I want to celebrate farmers for producing 10,000 tubers of yam, not celebrating for giving them one sachet as fertilizer.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Damilola, for your time and also for speaking to us on this.